Police dog finds baby under rubble after earthquake, and what he did will break your heart. The first tremors hit Oceanside, California at 3:17 a.m. when most residents were deep in dreams. What began as a gentle vibration quickly escalated into a violent shake that tore through the peaceful coastal town with merciless force. Streets split open, buildings crumbled, and the darkness filled with screams as the 7.8 magnitude earthquake ravaged everything in its path. Jack Miller, a 72-year-old, retired firefighter, awoke to the sound of his bedroom walls cracking. His first thought wasn't for himself, but for Ethan, his 11-month-old grandson sleeping in the nursery down the hall. Jack had been raising Ethan since his daughter Sarah's accident 6 months ago, which had left her with severe injuries and memory issues. She was currently at a rehabilitation center 3 towns over, slowly recovering both physically and mentally. "Ethan!" Jack shouted, stumbling through the hallway as picture frames crashed around him. The floor heaved beneath his feet like a storm-tossed ship. He grabbed the doorframe of the nursery just as the roof began to splinter above them. In that terrible moment, Jack made a split-second decision. Lunging for the crib, he covered Ethan with his body as the ceiling gave way. The last thing he remembered was the weight of wood and concrete pressing down, and Ethan's frightened cries beneath him. Miles away at the Oceanside Fire Department, Chief Ryan Thompson rallied his rescue teams. The magnitude of the disaster was immediately apparent. They would need every available resource, and then some. "Call in mutual aid from San Diego and LA, he ordered, studying the preliminary damage reports. "And get K9 units here ASAP. We're going to need them." Among those listening was Logan Ward, a 34-year-old firefighter whose face hardened with resolve as the situation unfolded. After confirming his assignment with Chief Thompson, Logan made an unorthodox decision. Instead of heading directly to his designated sector, he took a detour to a modest house on the outskirts of town. "Buddy, I know you're retired," Logan said, kneeling before an aging German shepherd who greeted him at the door. "But we need you one more time." Scout wasn't just any dog. For 8 years, he had been the department's most successful search and rescue K9, with over 50 lives saved to his credit. Although arthritis had forced his retirement 2 years ago, the intelligence in his eyes remained undimmed. Logan quickly fitted Scout with his old service vest. "Jack and Ethan's neighborhood was hit hard," he explained, as if the dog could understand every word. "Jack's not answering his phone." What Logan didn't mention was that Jack Miller had been more than just a colleague. He had been Logan's mentor, the man who had saved Logan from a life spiraling out of control after he lost his parents in a wildfire a decade ago. Jack had also been Scout's original handler before passing the leash to Logan when his own knees could no longer keep up with the demands of the job. By sunrise, Oceanside resembled a war zone. Emergency vehicles navigated shattered streets, while helicopters circled overhead. Rescue teams established a grid system, methodically searching for survivors among the rubble. The air was thick with dust and desperation. Logan and Scout were assigned to the Eastern Residential District, where Jack's single-story home was located. As they approached the street, Logan's stomach knotted. Jack's house was barely recognizable, just a pile of twisted wood and concrete where a family home had stood hours before. "Scout, search," Logan commanded, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. The German shepherd moved forward with purpose, his nose working the air currents while his paws tested the unstable debris. Despite his age, Scout's training kicked in immediately. He circled the perimeter of the collapsed structure, then began working his way inward, pausing occasionally to look back at Logan for guidance. 20 minutes into the search, Scout's behavior changed. His ears perked forward, and his movements became more focused. Near what would have been the eastern side of the house, he stopped abruptly, paws working frantically at a section of drywall and wooden beams. "What is it, boy?" Logan rushed to his side, heart pounding. Scout let out a sharp, insistent bark, the alert he'd been trained to give when he detected human scent beneath debris. Logan immediately signaled to the nearby rescue team. "Potential survivor, Scouts. Got something." The team converged quickly, bringing specialized equipment to carefully remove layers of debris. Logan kept Scout close as they worked, both watching intently as each piece was lifted away. After what seemed like an eternity, a rescue worker froze. "I hear something," she whispered. It's a baby crying." Logan's breath caught in his throat. "Ethan," he murmured. With renewed urgency but extreme caution, the team continued their work. When they finally created an opening large enough to see inside, Scout pushed forward before anyone could stop him, squeezing through the narrow gap. "Scout, get back here!" Logan called, but the dog was already beyond reach. Inside the pocket created by fallen beams, Scout found baby Ethan, miraculously alive in a small space protected by his grandfather's body. Jack had managed to shield the child with his own body before being pinned by falling debris, creating a life-saving cocoon. The dog gently nudged the whimpering infant, then lay down beside him, offering warmth and comfort. When the rescue workers widened the opening enough for a paramedic to slip through, they were met with an astonishing sight. The retired search dog curled protectively around the baby, who had quieted in the animal's presence. Ethan's tiny fingers were tangled in Scout's fur, his terrified cries reduced to occasional hiccups. "I can't believe it," the paramedic whispered into her radio. "The dog's protecting him. It's like he knows." They carefully extracted Ethan first, passing him to waiting medical personnel. The infant was dehydrated and scared, but appeared largely unharmed. Jack's condition was far more serious, unconscious with multiple injuries. He was rushed to Oceanside Memorial Hospital once they freed him from the debris. Scout refused to leave, even after both victims were evacuated. He continued searching the rubble, as if sensing there might be someone else. Logan eventually had to carry the exhausted dog away. At the hospital, doctors worked frantically to stabilize Jack. During a brief moment of consciousness, the elderly man's eyes fluttered open. He looked directly at the nurse beside him. "My grandson," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Where's Ethan?" "He's safe," the nurse assured him. "They found him. He's being checked out, but he seems okay." Jack's weathered face relaxed slightly. Before tension returned, "Scout," he whispered. "Tell Scout. Protect him. Promise me." Before the nurse could respond, Jack slipped back into unconsciousness. In the pediatric unit, baby Ethan was evaluated and placed in a temporary crib. Despite the excellent care, he cried inconsolably, his tiny face red with distress. Outside, Scout paced restlessly beside Logan, whining and looking toward the hospital entrance. "I know, buddy," Logan said, patting the dog's head. "I wish we could go in too." Dr. Melissa Chen, the pediatrician overseeing Ethan's care, stepped outside for a brief break and noticed the anxious dog. After Logan explained the situation, she made an unprecedented decision. "That dog saved his life," she said, "and the baby won't stop crying. Maybe." Against hospital protocol, Scout was allowed into the pediatric unit after a quick bath and inspection. The moment he entered Ethan's room, the baby's cries subsided. Scout padded directly to the crib, resting his chin on the edge. Ethan's small hand reached out, touching the dog's muzzle. For the first time since his rescue, the baby's face relaxed into something resembling peace. Dr. Chen watched in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted to Logan. "It's almost as if they know each other." Logan nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. "They might," he said quietly. "They just might." As night fell on the devastated community, the search for survivors continued under floodlights. At Oceanside Memorial, Scout remained vigilant beside Ethan's crib, refusing food or rest. The nurses created a makeshift bed for him, but the dog only used it briefly, always returning to his self-appointed post beside the baby. In the ICU, Jack's condition remained critical. Among his personal effects, a nurse found a water-damaged photograph, a much younger Jack standing proudly beside Scout as a puppy, with a smiling young woman, clearly Jack's daughter, kneeling between them. Logan, who had returned to the rescue, efforts after ensuring Scout could stay with Ethan, remained unaware of this discovery. Exhausted from hours of searching, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the connection between Scout, Jack, and baby Ethan than he understood. As dawn approached, bringing with it the second day after the earthquake, Logan had no idea that the most remarkable chapters of this story were yet to unfold. The second day after the earthquake dawned with Oceanside in controlled chaos. The disaster had claimed dozens of buildings and left hundreds homeless, yet the community rallied together with remarkable resilience. Rescue teams continued their relentless search for survivors, while makeshift shelters filled with displaced residents. At Oceanside Memorial Hospital, Dr. Melissa Chen made her morning rounds with a clipboard in hand and dark circles under her eyes. She'd been on duty for nearly 30 hours straight, but when she entered Ethan Miller's room, she couldn't help but smile at the scene before her. Scout lay on the floor beside Ethan's crib, his tail thumping weakly against the linoleum. The baby was awake, babbling and reaching through the crib slats toward his furry guardian. Despite hospital regulations that should have prevented an animal from staying overnight, no one had the heart to separate them after witnessing how Scout's presence calmed the traumatized infant. "You're quite the pair," Dr. Chen murmured, checking Ethan's vitals. "How did you two know each other before all this?" Nurse Jessica Winters entered with a bottle for Ethan. "You won't believe what I found in Mr. Miller's personal effects," she said, handing Dr. Chen a plastic bag containing a water-damaged photo. "Look at this. It's the dog, the baby's grandfather, and a young woman. The date on the back is from 8 years ago." Dr. Chen studied the photograph. "That must be Sarah Miller, Ethan's mother. I've been trying to contact her since they brought Ethan in, but the rehabilitation center where she's staying was evacuated due to the earthquake. No one can tell me where the patients were transferred." As if sensing they were discussing his "A family?" Scout raised his head and whined softly. "I know, boy," Jessica said, kneeling to stroke his gray muzzle. "We're doing everything we can." Meanwhile, across town, Logan Ward was helping coordinate search efforts in the neighborhood surrounding Jack's destroyed home. The initial 48-hour window, when finding survivors was most likely, was closing fast, and fatigue weighed heavily on every rescuer. Logan had just finished checking a partially collapsed garage when his radio crackled. "Ward, we need you at the eastern sector," came Chief Thompson's voice. "We've found something you should see." When Logan arrived at the designated location, about 2 blocks from Jack's house, he found the chief standing beside a young woman who clutched a hard hat in trembling hands. "This is Madison Clark," Chief Thompson explained. "She was Sarah Miller's neighbor before Sarah's accident. She has information about Jack and Ethan." Madison nodded nervously. "I've been volunteering with the Red Cross since the quake hit. When I heard Jack and Ethan were rescued, I knew I had to speak up." She took a deep breath. Sarah wasn't just recovering from physical injuries. Before her accident, she was being threatened by her ex-boyfriend, Ethan's father. He has a history of violence, and he was demanding custody despite having no legal rights. Jack was helping Sarah hide from him. Logan's expression darkened. "Does this ex know where they live?" "I don't think so. Sarah was careful, but—" Madison hesitated. "He's been seen in Oceanside recently. My sister spotted him at a gas station 2 days before the earthquake." Chief Thompson and Logan exchanged worried glances. "We need to get someone at the hospital," Logan said firmly. "If he learns about the earthquake and that Ethan was rescued—" "Already done," Chief Thompson replied. "I've contacted security. But there's something else you should know, Logan. Madison says Jack used to talk about having a backup plan if anything ever happened to him. Something about entrusting Scout with Ethan's protection. Scout? Logan's brow furrowed. But Jack hasn't been Scout's handler for years. Madison nodded. He told Sarah that Scout was specially bonded with her, that if necessary, the dog would recognize Ethan as part of his pack because of the blood connection. Jack said Scout would protect him with his life. The strange behavior of his former K9 partner suddenly made sense to Logan. Somehow, Jack had maintained a connection with Scout even after officially passing him to Logan for handling. The old firefighter must have brought Scout and Sarah together regularly, creating a bond that extended to her son. "I need to get to the hospital," Logan said, already turning to leave. Back at Oceanside Memorial, Dr. Chen was conducting a case review with the hospital administrator when an unfamiliar man approached the nurse's station in the pediatric wing. Tall and well-dressed in a business suit that seemed out of place among the disorder of a disaster response, he carried a briefcase and wore an expression of practiced concern. "I'm here about Ethan Miller," he announced to the receptionist. "I'm his father, Daniel Reynolds. I just heard about the earthquake on the news and drove straight here from Los Angeles." The receptionist hesitated. "Let me page Dr. Chen for you." In Ethan's room, Scout suddenly stood at attention, ears forward and hackles raised. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he positioned himself between the crib and the door. Nurse Jessica, who had been changing Ethan's diaper, froze at the dramatic change in the dog's demeanor. "What's wrong, Scout?" she whispered. Dr. Chen arrived at the nurse's station to find a handsome man in his mid-30s presenting identification and custody documents. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him cautiously, remembering Madison's warning call that had come through just 20 minutes earlier. "I'm Dr. Chen, overseeing Ethan's care. I understand you're claiming to be his father." "Not claiming, doctor. I am his father," he corrected with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have legal documents right here. I've been trying to locate my son for months. His mother disappeared with him illegally." "I see," Dr. Chen said carefully. "Well, there are protocols we need to follow, especially since Ethan is currently under state protection due to the emergency situation. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office while our legal department verifies your documents." Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "I'd like to see my son first. I've been worried sick." "Of course you have," Dr. Chen replied smoothly. "But Ethan has been through a traumatic experience. He's only just stabilized. Any disruption—" "Doctor," Daniel interrupted, his voice hardening, "I've driven 4 hours to get here. I'm not leaving without seeing my son." Security Officer Mark Daniels, who had been discreetly alerted to the situation, moved closer, pretending to check visitor badges nearby. "Let me check if Ethan is awake," Dr. Chen offered, using her keycard, to enter the secure pediatric area while gesturing for Daniel to wait. Once through the doors, she hurried to Ethan's room, where she found Jessica standing nervously beside the crib, while Scout continued his low, threatening growl. "He's been like this for the past 5 minutes," Jessica whispered. "I've never seen him act this way." "Ethan's alleged father is here," Dr. Chen explained quickly. "We're stalling while security checks his story, but he's insistent on seeing Ethan." Scout's growl intensified at these words, as if he understood the threat. At that moment, Logan burst through the hospital's main entrance, still wearing his dust-covered rescue gear. He flashed his firefighter ID to bypass the regular visitor screening and headed straight for the pediatric ward, only to find Daniel Reynolds arguing with Dr. Chen in the hallway. "Sir, as I explained, we're following emergency protocols," Dr. Chen was saying, maintaining her professional composure despite Daniel's increasingly aggressive tone. "And I'm telling you that I have rights," Daniel snapped. "If you don't let me see my son right now, I'll have my lawyer here so fast your head will spin." Is "Is there a problem here?" Logan asked, stepping forward. Daniel turned, annoyed at the interruption. "This is a private matter." "Not if you're trying to see Ethan Miller," Logan replied evenly. "I'm Logan Ward, family friend and current guardian of Scout, the search and rescue dog that found Ethan." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Search dog? What does that have to do with anything?" Before Logan could respond, a commotion erupted from inside Ethan's room. Scout had somehow managed to push the door open with his nose and now stood in the hallway, teeth bared and focused entirely on Daniel. The transformation in the normally gentle dog was startling. He looked ready to attack. Daniel took an involuntary step backward. "Get that animal away from me!" "Scout, hold!" Logan commanded, though he made no move to restrain the dog. Instead, he studied Daniel's reaction with interest. Funny thing about trained search dogs, they have incredible instincts about people. Scout here was Jack Miller's partner for years before he was mine. He knows Ethan, and apparently he knows you too. "I've never seen that dog in my life," Daniel insisted, but his face had paled. Security Officer Daniels approached, hand on his radio. "Dr. Chen, we've received verification from the police. This gentleman has a restraining order against him filed by Sarah Miller 6 months ago. He's not supposed to be within 500 feet of Ethan or Sarah." Daniel's expression changed instantly from indignation to calculation. For a tense moment, everyone in the hallway remained frozen. Then, with startling speed, Daniel turned and bolted toward the exit. "Stop him!" Logan shouted, but Scout was already in motion, racing down the corridor after the fleeing man. Daniel made it to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. He burst out of the emergency exit into the parking lot, only to find Scout blocking his path, snarling ferociously. The German Shepherd hadn't attacked. His training prevented that, but he effectively cornered Daniel until security personnel arrived moments later. As Daniel was taken into custody, protesting loudly about his rights, Logan knelt beside Scout, who was panting from the exertion. "Good boy," he murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. Jack would be proud. Back in the pediatric ward, Dr. Chen updated Logan on Jack's condition. The elderly man remained unconscious but stable. His injuries were serious. Several broken ribs, a punctured lung, and head trauma. But the doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery. "What about Sarah?" Logan asked. "Any word on where she was evacuated to?" "Not yet," Dr. Chen admitted. "The communication systems are still spotty, but we're checking every evacuation center and temporary medical facility." Logan nodded, absently stroking Scout's head as the dog settled once more beside Ethan's crib. "I need to get back to the rescue operation, but Scout should stay here. Clearly he takes his protection duties seriously." "I think that's wise," Dr. Chen agreed, watching as Ethan reached through the crib slats toward the dog. "Whatever connection they have, it's keeping Ethan calm. And after what just happened with Daniel Reynolds, I'd feel better having Scout on guard." As Logan prepared to leave, Dr. Chen stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "There's something else you should know," she said quietly. When they were examining Jack's personal effects, they found a small fireproof box in the rubble of his house. Inside was a letter addressed to you. She handed Logan a sealed envelope, slightly singed around the edges but otherwise intact. His name was written across the front in Jack's distinctive handwriting. "He must have known something might happen," Logan murmured, staring at the envelope. "That's why he kept trying to tell me about Scout and Ethan these past few months." "You should read it," Dr. Chen encouraged. "It might help us understand what's going on." Logan carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, his eyes scanning Jack's familiar scrawl. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to understanding and finally to resolute determination. "I know what Jack was trying to do," he said at last, folding the letter and tucking it into his pocket. And I know what I need to do next." In the hazy glow of the hospital's emergency backup lights, Logan Ward sat beside Jack Miller's bed in the ICU, the letter still clutched in his hand. Outside, the evening darkness had fallen over Oceanside, bringing a temporary lull to the rescue operations. Rain had begun to fall, complicating the search efforts and dampening the spirits of those still hoping to find loved ones. "You old fox," Logan murmured to Jack's unconscious form. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" The letter had revealed everything. Jack's growing concerns about Daniel Reynolds' persistent threats, his fears for Sarah and Ethan's safety, and the extraordinary measures he had taken to ensure his grandson's protection. The most surprising revelation was the bond Jack had methodically cultivated between Scout and Sarah, bringing the retired K-9 to visit them regularly, even after officially transferring handling duties to Logan. "You knew Scout would recognize Ethan's scent because of those visits," Logan continued, speaking as if Jack could hear him. "You trained him to protect your family without me even realizing it." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Chen entered, carrying a tablet and wearing a cautiously optimistic expression. "We've found her," she announced. "Sarah Miller was evacuated to Ridgecrest Community Hospital, about 30 miles inland. They've been operating on emergency generators with limited communication capabilities, which is why it took so long to locate her." Logan stood quickly. "Is she all right?" "Physically, yes. Her rehabilitation was progressing well before the evacuation." Dr. Chen hesitated. "However, her doctors report that the stress of the earthquake and sudden relocation has caused some regression in her cognitive recovery. She's experiencing increased confusion and memory gaps." "Does she know about Jack and Ethan?" Dr. Chen shook her head. "They haven't told her yet. Given her fragile mental state, they're concerned about how she'll handle the news." Logan glanced, back at Jack, then at the letter in his hand. "I need to see her. Jack's letter mentions some important information only Sarah would know." "I anticipated you might say that," Dr. Chen replied with a small smile. "I've already arranged for transportation. A medical transport helicopter is making supply runs between the hospitals. They can take you on their return trip in about an hour." Logan's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you, but what about Ethan and Scout? With Reynolds in custody, they should be safe, but—" "Don't worry. I've convinced the hospital administrator to officially register Scout as a therapy animal for Ethan. They won't be separated." She paused. "There's something else. The police found evidence in Reynolds' car suggesting he'd been tracking Jack's movements for weeks. They believe he may have accomplices. All the more reason to follow Jack's plan," Logan muttered, more to himself than to Dr. Chen. Later that night, as the rain intensified into a downpour, Logan boarded the medical helicopter. The flight to Ridgecrest was turbulent, with strong winds buffeting the aircraft. Logan used the time to reread Jack's letter, committing its contents to memory. One passage in particular stood out. "If anything happens to me, you must find Sarah immediately." Behind the family photo in her rehab room, there's a key to a storage unit in San Diego. The unit contains everything needed to protect Ethan from Reynolds: legal documents, evidence of his threats, and most importantly, proof that he has no biological claim to my grandson. Sarah trusted only me with this information, but now I'm trusting you, Logan. Scout's connection to Ethan is stronger than you know. The three of them spent weeks together after Ethan's birth, before Reynolds began his campaign of intimidation. In some ways, Scout was Ethan's first protector. When the helicopter finally touched down at Ridgecrest Community Hospital, Logan was met by Dr. Vanessa Taylor, Sarah's neurologist. "Mr. Ward," she greeted him, shouting over the noise of the helicopter blades. "Dr. Chen briefed me on the situation. Sarah's been asking about her father and son since the earthquake, but we've been deflecting until we had confirmed information. She senses something is wrong." How bad is her memory loss? Logan asked, as they hurried through the rain toward the building. It's complicated, Dr. Taylor explained. Her long-term memory is largely intact, but her injury affected her ability to form new memories for a period after the accident. There are approximately 3 months that remain hazy for her. Unfortunately, those months include some of Reynolds's most aggressive behavior. They reached Sarah's room on the 2nd floor. Through the small window in the door, Logan could see a young woman sitting in a chair by the window, watching the rain. Even in profile, her resemblance to Jack was striking. The same determined set of the jaw, the same thoughtful eyes. "Should I come in with you?" Dr. Taylor asked. Logan shook his head. Jack's letter said she might be more comfortable with someone connected to Scout. We've never met, but Jack showed her pictures of me with Scout during their visits. Taking a deep breath, Logan knocked gently and entered the room. Sarah turned from the window, her expression guarded until her eyes fell on the firefighter insignia on Logan's jacket. "You work with my dad," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Logan confirmed. "I'm Logan Ward. Jack and I served together for years." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're Scout's new handler. Dad showed me photos." Her voice tightened. "Where's my father? Where's Ethan? No one will tell me anything since the earthquake. They keep saying they're gathering information, but I know something's wrong." Logan took the chair across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "There was an earthquake in Oceanside. 2 days ago, your father's house was damaged. Jack was injured protecting Ethan." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "How bad?" "Jack is stable but unconscious. Ethan is perfectly fine, not a scratch on him. Scout found them in the rubble." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but Logan could see her fighting to maintain composure. "Scout found them, but he's retired. I brought him to the search site. He went straight to Jack's house and located Ethan. Sarah, your father left me a letter explaining some things, but I need your help to fill in the gaps." Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded. "What did the letter say?" Jack mentioned a storage unit. "In San Diego. He said you hid important documents there, including proof that Daniel Reynolds isn't Ethan's biological father." The color drained from Sarah's face. "He told you about Daniel?" "Reynolds showed up at the hospital today, trying to claim Ethan. Scout stopped him. He's in police custody now, but Jack was worried he might have accomplices." Sarah's hands began to tremble. "He found us," she whispered, "after everything Dad did to keep us hidden." "Sarah," Logan said gently, "I need to know the truth about Ethan's father. Jack's letter implied it's someone else entirely." For a long moment, Sarah was silent, seemingly waging an internal battle. Finally, she stood and moved to a framed family photograph on her bedside table. She removed the back of the frame and extracted a small key. "My father was right to trust you," she said, handing Logan the key. "The storage unit is at Bayside Security Storage, Unit 247. The entry code is my birthday, 04-15-89. She took a deep breath. "Reynolds and I dated briefly. When I ended things, he became obsessive, controlling. By then I was already pregnant, but not by him. He refused to believe it. When Ethan was born, he became convinced the baby was his, despite DNA evidence to the contrary." "Who is Ethan's father?" Logan asked. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "His name is Michael Reeves. He was a marine biologist working on a conservation project in Oceanside. We had a brief relationship before he left for a year-long expedition to Antarctica. He doesn't know about Ethan. The documents in the storage unit include his contact information and legal acknowledgement of paternity, which he signed before leaving, just in case something happened between us while he was gone." "Why didn't you tell Reynolds about Michael?" "I tried, but he wouldn't listen. He became more threatening, insisting Ethan was his. When he broke into my apartment, Dad convinced me to move in with him for safety. That's when we started the restraining order process." Logan nodded slowly, And Scout? Jack wrote that Scout spent time with you and Ethan. A genuine smile briefly crossed Sarah's face. Dad brought Scout to visit almost every day after Ethan was born. He said Scout needed socialization with babies for his training, but I always suspected there was more to it. Scout would lie beside Ethan's crib for hours, completely devoted. Dad used to joke that Scout thought he was Ethan's personal bodyguard. He wasn't joking, Logan said softly. Jack was training Scout as a backup plan all along. Gah, that sounds like Dad, Sarah replied, a bittersweet fondness in her voice. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. Her expression darkened suddenly. Wait. If Reynolds found Ethan at the hospital, he could have people watching. You said he's in custody, but for how long? The restraining order violation should keep him held for at least 72 hours, Logan assured her. But you're right to be concerned. Jack seems to have anticipated this situation too. He hesitated. Sarah, your father suggested in his letter that you and Ethan might need to disappear for a while, at least until Reynolds' legal situation is resolved. He mentioned a property in Northern California. The cabin at Lake Tahoe, Sarah finished for him. Dad bought it under his mother's maiden name. No connection to the Miller family in any public records. She looked out at the rain-streaked window. I need to get to Ethan. When can I leave this place? Dr. Taylor mentioned you're still experiencing memory issues, Logan said carefully. Sarah's jaw set in a determined line that reminded Logan powerfully of Jack. My memory isn't perfect, but I know my son needs me. I know Reynolds is dangerous, and I know my father would want me to follow his contingency plan. Before Logan could respond, Dr. Taylor knocked and entered the room. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see. She held up a tablet, displaying a breaking news story. The headline made Logan's blood run cold. Suspect in custody escapes during hospital transfer. Reynolds, Logan growled. How? The article says the police vehicle transporting him was involved in an accident due to the heavy rain, Dr. Taylor explained. He escaped during the confusion. Sarah stood abruptly. I need to get to Ethan now. It's not safe, Dr. Taylor objected. You're still under medical supervision, and in this weather. My son is in danger, Sarah interrupted firmly. I'm leaving with or without your approval. Logan made a quick decision. The helicopter that brought me is scheduled to return to Oceanside in 30 minutes with medical supplies. I'll arrange for you to be on it. Dr. Taylor sighed. I can't officially discharge you against medical advice in these circumstances, but... She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bottle of medication. Take these for your headaches, and promise me you'll follow up with a neurologist wherever you end up. As Sarah quickly gathered her few belongings, Logan stepped outside to make a phone call to Dr. Chen, explaining the new developments. When he returned, Sarah was waiting, a small backpack over her shoulder and a determined expression on her face. There's something else you should know, Logan told her as they headed toward the helipad. Your father's injuries. The doctors aren't certain about his recovery timeline. He might be unconscious for some time, but he made arrangements to protect you and Ethan, and I intend to honor his wishes. Rain lashed against the helicopter's windows as it struggled through the turbulent night sky toward Oceanside. Sarah Miller sat rigidly in her seat, knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her seat. The weather had worsened considerably since Logan's arrival at Ridgecrest, and the pilot had warned them it would be a rough journey back. ETA, 20 minutes, the pilot announced through their headsets. Oceanside Memorial has cleared us for emergency landing despite the conditions. Logan nodded acknowledgement, then turned to Sarah. Dr. Chen is preparing for our arrival. She's arranged for Ethan to be ready for immediate transport. And Scout? Sarah asked, having to shout over the noise of the rotors. He hasn't left Ethan's side since the rescue. Your father was right about their connection. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. Dad always said Scout was special, that he could sense things other dogs couldn't. I thought he was just being sentimental. The helicopter dipped suddenly, causing Sarah to gasp and grab Logan's arm. He steadied her with a reassuring smile. Jack never exaggerated about important things, Logan said. Especially not about Scout's abilities. As they approached Oceanside, the devastation below became visible even through the rain-streaked windows. Entire blocks lay in ruins, with emergency vehicles and floodlights dotting the landscape like fireflies. Despite the late hour, rescue operations continued under massive temporary lights. The helicopter touched down on the hospital's rooftop helipad with a jarring bump. Medical staff huddled under umbrellas, ready to assist with unloading emergency supplies. Dr. Chen stood among them, her white coat flapping in the wind. "Welcome back," she shouted to Logan as he helped Sarah from the helicopter. "We need to move quickly. There's been another development." "Reynolds?" Logan asked, instinctively moving closer to Sarah. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Police received a tip that he's in the area. They've increased security around the hospital, but given the earthquake response stretching resources thin, we need to get Ethan now," Sarah insisted, already moving toward the rooftop entrance. They hurried through the hospital corridors, passing rooms filled with earthquake victims. The facility was operating beyond capacity, with makeshift beds in hallways and staff working double shifts. Despite the chaos, Dr. Chen led them efficiently through the labyrinth of corridors until they reached the pediatric ward. Outside Ethan's room, a security guard nodded respectfully to Dr. Chen. Inside, Nurse Jessica was preparing Ethan for transport, packing a small bag with diapers, formula, and other essentials. Scout lay beside the crib, alert but calm. When the door opened, his ears perked up, and his eyes fixed on Sarah with intense recognition. "Scout!" Sarah whispered, dropping to her knees as the German shepherd rushed to her, tail wagging furiously. She buried her face in his fur, the dam finally breaking as tears flowed freely. "Thank you for finding them. Thank you." A soft coo from the crib drew her attention. Sarah rose unsteadily and approached her son, who was awake and watching the proceedings with curious eyes. The moment he saw his mother, Ethan's face lit up with a toothless grin, his small arms reaching toward her. "Hi, baby," Sarah sobbed, lifting him carefully and holding him close. "Mommy's here now. You're safe." Logan and Dr. Chen exchanged glances, silently agreeing to give mother and child a moment of privacy. They stepped into the hallway, where Dr. Chen handed Logan a thick envelope. "Jack's condition has stabilized." "Somewhat, but he's still unconscious," she reported quietly. "Before you arrived, he had a brief moment of consciousness. He mentioned a name, Michael." Logan nodded. "Ethan's biological father." Sarah confirmed it. "I thought you should know. Also, I've prepared medical records for both Jack and Ethan. Copies. Only nothing that could be tracked electronically. There's also a week's worth of Sarah's medication and basic supplies for the baby." "Thank you," Logan said, genuinely moved by her thoroughness. "You've gone above and beyond." Dr. Chen shrugged. "Jack Miller saved my brother from a house fire when I was in medical school. I owe him more than this." The connection surprised Logan, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Jack had touched countless lives during his long career. It made sense that his extended network would rally around his family in crisis. "There's an unmarked hospital vehicle waiting in the ambulance bay," Dr. Chen continued. "The keys are in the envelope. No GPS, no tracking systems. It belonged to my late husband. I've kept it registered but rarely use it." Before Logan could express further gratitude, Sarah emerged from the room with Ethan bundled securely against her chest and Scout following closely at her heels. "We're ready," she said, her voice steadier than before. Logan led them through a service corridor and down a freight elevator to avoid the busier areas of the hospital. The ambulance bay was chaotic with vehicles coming and going. perfect cover for their departure. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but thunder still rumbled in the distance. Dr. Chen's vehicle, a modest black SUV with tinted windows, waited in a corner spot marked Maintenance. Logan helped Sarah secure Ethan in a car seat that had been thoughtfully installed, then opened the rear door for Scout, who hopped in without prompting and positioned himself protectively beside the baby. "The storage unit first," Sarah said as Logan slid into the driver's seat. "Then north to the cabin." Logan nodded, starting the engine. "It'll be dawn by the time we reach San Diego. We'll need to be careful. Reynolds might anticipate we'd head for the storage unit." "We don't have a choice," Sarah replied firmly. "Those documents prove Ethan isn't his. Without them, he could continue claiming paternity." As they pulled away from the hospital, neither noticed the dark sedan that waited across the street, its driver speaking urgently into a cell phone. The drive to San Diego was tense but uneventful. Ethan slept peacefully in his car seat while Scout maintained his vigilant position. Sarah dozed intermittently, the strain of the day's events and her still-healing brain taking their toll. Dawn was breaking over the city when they arrived at Bayside Security Storage, a modern facility with keypad-controlled gates and 24-hour surveillance cameras. Logan circled the block twice, checking for any signs of surveillance before pulling into the parking lot. "I'll go alone," Sarah insisted, holding out her hand for the key. "If Reynolds is watching, he knows me, but he might not recognize you." Logan shook his head. "Jack would never forgive me if I let you go in there alone. We'll go together. Scout will stay with Ethan." The German shepherd seemed to understand, settling more firmly beside the sleeping baby as Logan cracked the windows slightly and locked the doors. Inside the facility, they located Unit 247 without difficulty. Sarah punched in her birthday on the electronic keypad, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, the small unit was meticulously organized with labeled plastic bins, Jack's influence clearly evident. "Here," Sarah said, pulling a folder from a box marked Legal. "This contains Michael's paternity acknowledgement, the DNA test results, and my restraining order documentation against Reynolds." Logan scanned the documents quickly, noting the irrefutable evidence that Daniel Reynolds had no biological connection to Ethan. This should be enough to stop his custody claims permanently. Sarah nodded, then reached for another box labeled Emergency. Inside were several bundles of cash, prepaid credit cards, 2 disposable phones, and a set of identity documents under different names. "Dad always prepared for the worst," Sarah explained, her voice catching. "He said it was from years of seeing disasters firsthand. Always have a backup plan, and then a backup for your backup." They worked quickly, transferring the essential items to a small duffel bag. As Sarah zipped it closed, Logan's phone vibrated with an incoming text from Dr. Chen. "Reynolds spotted near hospital 30 min after you left. Be careful." "We need to move," Logan said, showing Sarah the message. "The Lake Tahoe cabin is about 7 hours from here. We should—" He stopped mid-sentence as the security system's alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and an automated voice announced, "Security breach at main entrance. All customers please remain in your units. Police have been notified." Sarah's eyes widened in panic. "Reynolds? Maybe, or it could be unrelated," Logan said, though he didn't believe it. "Either way, we can't stay here." They peered cautiously into the corridor. Other storage unit customers were doing the same, confusion evident on their faces. Logan spotted a rear exit sign at the far end of the hallway. "Stay close to me," he instructed, taking Sarah's arm and guiding her toward the exit. They moved briskly but calmly, trying not to draw attention. They had almost reached the door when a man's voice called out behind them. "Sarah, stop right there." Daniel Reynolds stood at the other end of the corridor, his expensive suit replaced by casual clothes that wouldn't attract attention. The wild look in his eyes made Logan instinctively push Sarah behind him. "Keep going," Logan muttered to her. "Get to the car. I'll handle this." "You're not taking my son," Reynolds shouted, advancing toward them. "I know what you're doing, trying to run away again." Other customers retreated into their units, doors slamming. The facility's alarm continued to wail, creating a surreal backdrop to the confrontation. "Mr. Reynolds," Logan said loudly, keeping his tone professional, "you're violating a restraining order." "The police are already on their way," Reynolds sneered. "By the time they sort this out, we'll be long gone. Sarah knows Ethan belongs with me." "DNA proves otherwise," Sarah called from behind Logan, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's all here, Daniel, the proof that you're not Ethan's father. It's over." Reynolds' face contorted with rage. "DNA can be faked. You turned against me, but Ethan is mine." He lunged forward suddenly. Logan, drawing on his emergency response training, stepped to meet him. The two men collided in the narrow corridor, Reynolds' momentum driving Logan back against the wall. Despite the other man's fury, Logan had the advantage of professional training. He managed to deflect Reynolds' wild punches and counter with a controlled takedown, pinning him to the floor. "Sarah, go!" Logan shouted, struggling to maintain his hold on the thrashing man. Sarah hesitated only briefly before running for the exit, clutching the duffel bag containing the crucial documents. Reynolds fought with the desperate strength of obsession, landing a lucky elbow to Logan's ribs that momentarily loosened his grip. Reynolds scrambled free and charged after Sarah, only to be tackled again by Logan in the parking lot. The commotion had drawn attention. Storage facility employees watched from a safe distance, and the sound of police sirens grew closer. Reynolds, realizing he was running out of time, changed tactics. "She's kidnapping my child," he shouted to the onlookers, trying to cast himself as the victim. "That woman in the SUV has my son." Sarah had reached the vehicle and was frantically unlocking the door when Reynolds' accusation rang out. Several bystanders turned toward her with suspicious looks. Inside the car, Scout began barking furiously, sensing the threat to his charges. As Reynolds made another break toward the SUV, the storage facility's security gate opened to admit 2 police cruisers. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, assessing the chaotic scene. "That man has a restraining order against him," Sarah called to the officers, pointing at Reynolds. "He's not allowed near me or my son." Reynolds froze, caught between his desperate goal and the reality of armed officers. For a tense moment, Logan feared he might do something drastically stupid. Instead, with a look of pure hatred at Sarah, Reynolds turned and sprinted toward the back of the facility. "He's running!" Logan shouted to the police, who immediately gave chase. In the confusion, Logan hurried to the SUV. "We need to go now," he told Sarah as he slid into the driver's seat. "Reynolds won't get far, but we can't risk being delayed by police questions." Sarah nodded, checking on Ethan, who had remarkably slept through the entire ordeal. Scout had positioned himself half over the car seat in a protective stance, his eyes fixed on the direction Reynolds had fled. Logan navigated carefully out of the parking lot as police focused on the pursuit. Once on the main road, he took a series of random turns to ensure they weren't being followed before heading north toward Interstate 80 and Lake Tahoe. "Will they catch him?" Sarah asked after several minutes of tense silence. "Probably," Logan replied honestly, "but I've seen enough cases like this to know he won't give up easily. The restraining order violations will keep him in custody longer this time, but eventually, he'll come looking again," Sarah finished softly. She glanced back at her sleeping son. "All of this because of a delusion. It's about control, not love," Logan said. "Jack understood that. It's why he put so many safeguards in place." Sarah leaned her head against the window, watching the city gradually give way to suburbs and then open highway. "I should contact Michael," she said finally. "Ethan's real father. He has a right to know what's happening. Jack mentioned in his letter that Michael is due back from his Antarctic expedition next month, Logan noted. Do you have a way to reach him? There's an emergency satellite contact in the documents for the research station. Dad insisted I include it when we prepared the paperwork. She smiled faintly, always 3 steps ahead. And as they continued north, the landscape changed from coastal plains to rolling hills. Ethan woke and began fussing, bringing a welcome disruption to the heavy atmosphere. Sarah tended to him with practiced efficiency, while Scout watched attentively, his protective instinct seemingly extending to every aspect of the baby's care. Logan's phone vibrated again. Another text from Dr. Chen. Jack showed signs of response to stimuli this morning. Doctors cautiously optimistic. He shared the news with Sarah, whose eyes brightened with the first genuine hope since their reunion. He's fighting, she said, gently stroking Ethan's cheek, just like he taught us to do. The storage facility confrontation had rattled them all, but with each mile that carried them farther from Oceanside and the chaos of the earthquake's aftermath, a tentative sense of security began to build. They had the documents, they had each other, and they had Scout, the unexpected guardian whose devotion transcended training. As morning gave way to afternoon, Logan found himself reflecting on the extraordinary series of events that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a routine emergency response had evolved into something far more personal. Jack had chosen him as part of his contingency plan, trusted him with the safety of his family. It was a responsibility Logan hadn't asked for, but now accepted without reservation. Your father once told me that the most important lessons in life come when you least expect them, Logan said after a long silence. I think I'm finally understanding what he meant. Sarah glanced over at him, a question in her eyes. He was teaching Scout to protect Ethan long before any of us realized what was happening, Logan explained. And in his own way, he was teaching me too, about commitment, about family, about keeping promises. Sarah reached across the console and briefly squeezed his hand. That's Dad, she said softly, still teaching, even when he's not here. Inside the back seat, Scout had settled with his head on the edge of Ethan's car seat, maintaining his self-appointed vigil. The baby had fallen back asleep, one tiny hand resting on the dog's muzzle in a gesture of complete trust. As they continued their journey toward the hidden sanctuary Jack had prepared, none of them could predict the challenges that still lay ahead. But in that moment, united by circumstance and bound by a promise, they formed an unlikely family of their own. One forged in crisis, but sustained by something deeper than mere survival. Lake Tahoe emerged on the horizon like a sapphire set, among emerald forests, its waters reflecting the late afternoon sun. After nearly 7 hours of driving, with only brief stops for necessities, Logan turned onto a narrow forest road that wound higher into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Almost there, Sarah said, studying a hand-drawn map she'd found among the documents from the storage unit. Dad's directions say to look for a split oak tree after the third switchback. The SUV climbed steadily, leaving civilization behind with each turn. Scout had remained vigilant throughout the journey, dividing his attention between keeping watch out the windows and monitoring baby Ethan, who had been remarkably patient despite the long drive. There, Logan pointed to an ancient oak whose trunk had split into 2 massive sections before rejoining higher up. He turned onto an even narrower track that would have been easy to miss if they hadn't been looking for it. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend, nestled against a backdrop of pines with a breathtaking view of the lake below. It was larger than Logan had expected, a substantial 2-story structure built of weathered logs and stone, with a wraparound porch and a detached garage. Dad bought this place 15 years ago, Sarah explained as Logan parked beside the cabin. He used to bring me here during summer vacations, said it was his insurance policy against the world going crazy. They approached cautiously, Scout ranging ahead to inspect the perimeter. The dog showed no signs of alarm, which Logan found reassuring. Inside, the cabin was clean and well-maintained, with rustic but comfortable furnishings. A generator provided electricity and a well-supplied running water. Jack had prepared for everything. The pantry was stocked with non-perishable food, and a chest freezer in the utility room contained additional supplies. "Look at this," Sarah called from a small room off the main living area. Dad set up a nursery. Logan joined her in the doorway. The room contained a crib, changing table, and rocking chair, along with a supply of diapers, formula, and baby clothes in various sizes. On the wall hung a collection of framed photographs, Jack holding newborn Ethan, Sarah sitting on the cabin's porch, pregnant and smiling, and most surprising, Scout lying protectively beside an infant, Ethan, on a living room floor. He was planning this for months, Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Creating a safe haven just in case. Logan nodded, moved by Jack's foresight and dedication. Your father never left anything to chance. As they settled into the cabin, a routine quickly established itself. Sarah focused on caring for Ethan, finding comfort in the mundane tasks of motherhood after the chaos of the past few days. Logan secured the perimeter, checking locks and sightlines, making mental notes of improvements to their security. Scout divided his time between patrolling the property and maintaining his position as Ethan's self-appointed guardian. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the porch, Logan found Sarah sitting in a rocking chair with Ethan sleeping against her shoulder. She was gazing out at the lake, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," Logan said softly, leaning against the railing. Sarah smiled faintly. "I was remembering something my dad told me when I was little. He said that the most important things in life aren't things at all. They're connections, the invisible threads that bind us to the people we love." She brushed a gentle kiss against Ethan's head. "I didn't fully understand what he meant until I had Ethan." Logan nodded. Jack shared that wisdom with me too, though in his own way. After my parents died in that wildfire, he was the one who pulled me back from the edge. Never preached, never pushed, just showed up day after day until I remembered how to live again. That sounds like Dad," Sarah agreed. "He believed in showing, not telling." They fell into companionable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Scout emerged from his patrol of the property and settled at Sarah's feet, his grey muzzle resting on his paws. "I've been thinking about reaching out to Michael," Sarah said after a while. "Ethan's father, the Antarctic researcher." Sarah nodded. "He deserves to know he has a son, especially now. I've drafted a message to send through the emergency contact protocol, but..." She hesitated. "I'm not sure what to say. Sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but our one-night stand resulted in a child who's now being hunted by a delusional ex-boyfriend." Despite the gravity of the situation, Logan couldn't help but chuckle. "Maybe lead with hope the penguins are treating you well first." Sarah laughed softly, careful not to wake Ethan. "You're right. I need to be direct but not overwhelming." Her expression grew serious again. "Michael is a good man. We weren't in love, but there was respect between us. He always said he wanted children someday. Just maybe not while studying krill migration patterns in Antarctica." "Exactly." Sarah adjusted Ethan's position as he stirred slightly. "But he should have the chance to decide what role he wants in Ethan's life." Dad agreed, which is why we prepared all the legal documentation to protect Michael's rights as much as Ethan's. Logan marveled again at Jack's thoroughness. Even while creating safeguards against Reynolds, he had ensured that Ethan's biological father could claim his rightful place when the time was right. The next morning, Logan awoke to an urgent text from Dr. Chen. "Jack awake and asking for you. Police need statement about Reynolds incident. Call ASAP." He found Sarah in the kitchen, feeding Ethan, while Scout watched attentively from his position beside the high chair. "Your father's awake," Logan announced, showing her the message. "Dr. Chen wants me to call." Sarah's eyes lit up with hope. "That's wonderful. How soon can we go see him?" Logan hesitated. "It might be safer if I go alone first. Reynolds is still at large, and he knows to look for all of us together. You and Ethan should stay here with Scout until we're sure it's safe." Though clearly disappointed, Sarah nodded in understanding. "You're right. Dad would want us to be cautious." Using one of the prepaid phones from the emergency kit, Logan called Dr. Chen. After confirming Jack's improved condition, they discussed the logistics of Logan's return to Oceanside. "The earthquake recovery is still ongoing, but things are more organized now," Dr. Chen explained. "The police have set up additional checkpoints around the city due to reports of looting, which might actually work in our favor. Reynolds would have a harder time slipping through." "What about Jack's security at the hospital?" Logan asked. "We've moved him to a private room with restricted access. Only staff on an approved list can enter, and there's a security guard posted 24/7. Logan considered his options. "I'll drive back today, but I'll take precautions to make sure I'm not followed on my return." After ending the call, he outlined the plan to Sarah. "I should be back by tomorrow evening at the latest. You have the satellite phone for emergencies, and there's a shotgun in the lockbox in the master bedroom. Jack showed me where he keeps the key last time we were here for his retirement party." Sarah nodded, her face a mixture of concern and determination. "We'll be fine. Scout and I will keep Ethan safe." As if understanding his responsibilities, Scout moved closer to Sarah and Ethan, his posture alert and protective. Logan departed shortly after, taking a circuitous route back to Oceanside to ensure he wasn't being followed. The city was still recovering from the earthquake, with construction crews working alongside emergency services to clear debris and shore up damaged buildings. Oceanside Memorial Hospital had established a more normal routine, though many patient beds remained occupied by earthquake victims. Dr. Chen met Logan in the hospital lobby. "Jack's been asking for you since he regained consciousness," she said, leading him toward the elevators. "He's still weak, but his mind is clear. The neurologist is cautiously optimistic about his recovery." Jack's room was on the 4th floor, in a section of the hospital, designated for long-term care. A uniformed security officer checked Logan's ID before allowing him to enter. Inside, the room was dim and quiet, with monitors beeping softly beside the bed. Jack Miller looked smaller than Logan remembered, diminished by his injuries and the hospital setting. But when the older man's eyes opened and focused on Logan, the strength of will that had defined Jack throughout his career was immediately apparent. "Took you long enough," Jack rasped, a hint of his familiar dry humor surfacing despite his condition. Logan moved to the bedside, emotion threatening to overcome his composure. "Had to make sure your contingency plan was executed properly, old man. You didn't exactly leave simple instructions." Jack's weathered face creased in a weak smile. "Sarah and Ethan?" "Safe at the cabin. Scout's with them." Jack nodded, visibly relieved. "Scout," he murmured. "Always knew he'd come through when it mattered." "You trained him well," Logan agreed. "Though you might have mentioned your secret training sessions with Sarah and Ethan." "Need-to-know basis," Jack replied with a ghost of his former gruffness. "And now you know." His expression grew serious. "Reynolds." Logan summarized the confrontation at the storage facility and Reynolds' subsequent escape. "Police are still searching, but he's gone to ground. Sarah has all the documentation safe, including the DNA evidence." "Not enough," Jack said, his voice strained with the effort of speaking. "Reynolds is obsessed, won't stop until—" He paused, gathering his strength, "until he can't come after them anymore." "The police have mounted a significant search," Logan assured him. With the restraining order violations and his escape from custody, he's looking at serious jail time when they catch him. Jack's eyes held a skepticism born from decades of seeing the justice system's limitations. Need a more permanent solution? He insisted. Need Michael. Logan blinked in surprise. Ethan's biological father. Sarah mentioned contacting him, but his expedition isn't due back for another month. Expedited return possible for family emergency, Jack said. Contact information in my personal effects, special satellite relay. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly checking Jack's vitals, spoke up. His personal items are in storage here. I can retrieve them for you. While they waited, Jack gripped Logan's wrist with surprising strength. Promise me, he whispered urgently. Promise you'll keep them safe until Michael can take over. I promise, Logan said without hesitation. But you'll be back on your feet soon, barking orders at all of us. Jack shook his head slightly, not taking chances, too important. His gaze intensified. Sarah trusts you. Scout trusts you. I trust you. The simple declaration carried the weight of Jack's entire character, a man who gave trust rarely but completely when he did. Dr. Chen returned with a plastic bag containing Jack's personal effects. Inside, Logan found a small, hardened satellite. Phone different from the one in the emergency kit at the cabin. Jack directed him to a specific contact labeled only as Antarctic Emergency Protocol. Call now, Jack instructed. Explain situation. Logan stepped into the hallway to make the job call. After navigating a complex verification system, he finally reached a communications officer at the Antarctic Research Station. He explained the situation as concisely as possible, emphasizing the urgency without causing undue alarm. I'll need to verify this request through multiple channels, the officer said after a long pause. But if confirmed, we can arrange for Dr. Reeves to be on the next supply flight to New Zealand, which leaves in 3 days. From there, commercial travel could have him in California within a week. Thank you, Logan said, relieved at the possibility of reinforcements. Please tell him his son is safe, but needs him. When Logan returned to the room, Jack had drifted into an exhausted sleep. Dr. Chen motioned Logan into the hallway. His recovery will be slow, she warned. The injuries were significant, and at his age, healing takes time. He's pushing himself too hard already. That's Jack, Logan replied with a sad smile. He won't rest until his family is safe. Speaking of which, Dr. Chen lowered her voice. Further, there was an incident this morning. Hospital security noticed someone matching Reynolds' description in the parking structure. By the time they responded, he was gone. Logan's jaw tightened. He's getting desperate. If he can't find Sarah and Ethan, he might try to use Jack as leverage. We've increased security and moved Jack twice already, Dr. Chen assured him. But you should be careful when you leave. He might try to follow you back to them. The warning only reinforced Logan's determination to protect Jack's family. After spending a few more hours with his mentor and making arrangements for secure updates on his condition, Logan prepared to return to Lake Tahoe. As Dr. Chen had suggested, he took elaborate precautions when leaving the hospital, using a service exit and switching vehicles twice before hitting the highway. Night had fallen by the time Logan approached the mountain roads leading to the cabin. Heavy clouds obscured the moon, and a light drizzle reduced visibility. As he navigated the winding route, a sense of unease grew in his gut, the same instinct that had saved his life during dangerous rescue operations. He slowed the car, scanning the road ahead and behind with heightened awareness. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, yet the feeling persisted. When he finally turned onto the narrow forest road leading to the cabin, Logan made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing all the way, he parked about half a mile from the property and proceeded on foot, using the trees for cover. The cabin appeared peaceful, with soft light glowing from the downstairs windows. From his position among the trees, Logan could see Sarah moving inside, carrying Ethan as she paced the living room. The domestic scene should have been reassuring, but Logan's unease only intensified when he realized he couldn't see Scout. The dog should have been visible inside, or patrolling the perimeter. Drawing closer, Logan froze at the sound of twigs snapping somewhere to his left. He crouched instinctively, using the underbrush for concealment. After an agonizing minute of complete stillness, he caught a glimpse of movement. A human figure slipping between trees about 30 yards away, moving toward the cabin. Logan's heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized Daniel Reynolds' profile in the dim light. Somehow, against all odds, the obsessed man had tracked them to this remote location. And now he was closing in on Sarah and Ethan, who remained unaware of the danger approaching. Logan needed to warn them, but shouting would reveal his position and potentially trigger Reynolds into rash action. He reached for his phone, intending to call the cabin, when a low growl emanated from the darkness behind Reynolds. Scout emerged from the shadows, his teeth bared and hackles raised as he positioned himself between the intruder and the cabin. Reynolds spun around, clearly surprised by the dog's appearance. He reached into his jacket, and Logan's blood ran cold at the glimpse of metal, a gun pulled from a shoulder holster. "No!" Logan shouted, abandoning stealth for immediate action as he burst from his hiding place. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Reynolds turned toward Logan's voice, momentarily distracted. Scout seized the opportunity, lunging forward with the precision of his years of training. The German Shepherd's powerful jaws clamped around Reynolds' wrist, forcing him to drop the weapon as he cried out in pain. Logan covered the distance between them in seconds, tackling Reynolds to the ground as Scout maintained his grip. Inside the cabin, lights flashed on, and Sarah appeared on the porch. Ethan clutched protectively to her chest. "Stay inside," Logan shouted to her. "Call for help." The struggle on the forest floor was desperate and primal. Reynolds fought with the strength of madness, heedless of the dog's teeth still sunk into his arm or Logan's trained combat skills. It took all of Logan's strength and training to subdue him, finally pinning him face down on the damp earth. "It's over, Reynolds," Logan panted, securing the man's hands behind his back with his belt. "You've lost." "He's my son," Reynolds spat, still struggling weakly. "Mine." Scout released his grip on Reynolds' arm but remained vigilant, growling whenever the man attempted to move. The dog's muzzle was speckled with blood, yet his control had been precise, the bite serious enough to disarm but not to cause permanent damage. Sarah had retreated into the cabin with Ethan, following Logan's instructions to call for help. Given their remote location, it would take time for authorities to arrive, but Logan had the situation under control. Scout maintained his position, a living barrier between Reynolds and the cabin where Ethan slept, unaware of the drama unfolding outside. Epilogue, full circle. 1 month later, the Oceanside boardwalk buzzed with activity as the coastal town continued its recovery. Though scars of the earthquake remained visible in the scaffolding and construction sites dotting the landscape, life had largely returned to normal. Children played on the beach, tourists browsed the reopened shops, and locals went about their business with the resilience that had defined their community in the aftermath of disaster. At a small cafe overlooking the ocean, Logan Ward sat at an outdoor table, absently scratching behind Scout's ears as the aging German Shepherd dozed in the warm sunshine. The dog had earned his rest. In the weeks following Reynolds' capture, Scout had been officially recognized as a hero by the Oceanside City Council. His picture featured prominently in local newspapers alongside stories of his remarkable rescue of Baby. Ethan and his role in apprehending Daniel Reynolds. Logan checked his watch and scanned the boardwalk. They were early for the meeting, but he couldn't help feeling anxious. So much had changed in the past month. Reynolds was in custody, awaiting trial facing multiple charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for years. The district attorney had been particularly motivated after learning of his obsessive pursuit of an infant who wasn't biologically his, the restraining order violations, and the weapon he'd brought to the cabin that night. "There they are," Logan murmured to Scout, whose ears perked up immediately. Sarah approached along the boardwalk, pushing Ethan in a stroller. Beside her walked a tall man with sun-weathered skin and thoughtful eyes. Michael Reeves, recently returned from Antarctica and now fully embracing his unexpected role as Ethan's father. Behind them, moving more slowly but with determined steps, came Jack Miller, leaning on a cane but otherwise looking remarkably recovered from his injuries. Scout rose to his feet, tail wagging in excitement. The German shepherd had split his time between the hospital during Jack's recovery and the temporary apartment where Sarah and Ethan were staying until their new home was ready. Even with Reynolds in custody, neither Logan nor Jack had been willing to take chances with their safety. "Look who's here, Ethan," Sarah cooed to her son as they reached the table. "It's Scout!" The 10-month-old squealed in delight, his small hands reaching toward the dog, who approached the stroller with gentle dignity, allowing Ethan to pat his muzzle with clumsy affection. "Still inseparable, I see," Jack commented, as he lowered himself carefully into a chair. "Some bonds can't be broken, no matter what." Michael nodded, his expression warm as he watched his son interact with the dog. "Sarah's told me everything Scout did for Ethan. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank him enough." "You don't need to," Logan replied. "Scout was just doing what Jack trained him to do, protect his family." Jack's weathered face creased in a smile. "And family isn't always about blood, is it? Sometimes it's about choice, about promises kept." The words hung meaningfully in the air as a server brought coffee and pastries. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: Michael's adjustment to fatherhood, Sarah's new job at the local marine research center, and Jack's progress in physical therapy. But throughout their discussion, Scout remained vigilant beside Ethan's stroller, his commitment undiminished by time or circumstance. "I've been meaning to ask," Michael said during a lull in the conversation. "What happens with Scout now? Sarah mentioned he's technically your K9 partner, Logan, but he's been staying with Jack since the hospital released him." Logan exchanged glances with Jack before answering. "Scout's officially retired, for real this time. The department held a ceremony last week. He's earned his rest." "But where will he live?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had been on everyone's mind. Jack cleared his throat. "That's actually why I wanted us all to meet today. I've been thinking about Scout's future." He reached down to stroke the dog's graying muzzle. "He's been my partner, my friend, and now my grandson's protector, but at his age, he deserves stability." "Dad, you know Scout is welcome to stay with us," Sarah began, but Jack held up a hand. "Let me finish, honey. The thing is, Scout's bonded with all of us in different ways, with me as his original handler, with Logan as his working partner, with you and Ethan as his special charges." Jack's eyes grew misty. "I watched how he moved between all of us during these past weeks, and it got me thinking." Jack pulled a folded document from his pocket and placed it on the table. "I'm putting my house up for sale. It's too big for just me anyway, and after the earthquake repairs, it doesn't quite feel the same." "Dad, where will you go?" Sarah asked, concerned. Jack smiled. "I made an offer on that property next door to your new place, the one with the guest cottage in the back." Michael's eyebrows rose in surprise, while Sarah's face lit up with understanding. "The cottage is perfect. For me, one level, manageable size, but close enough to see my grandson every day," Jack continued. "And the main house has plenty of room for a growing family and a retired search dog who's earned the right to watch his boy grow up." Logan felt a tightness in his throat as he grasped Jack's intention. "You're keeping the family together." "All of the family," Jack confirmed, his gaze moving from Michael to Sarah to Ethan, and finally resting on Scout. Some bonds are meant to last a lifetime. As if understanding his role in the conversation, Scout rose and moved between each person at the table, accepting gentle pats and scratches before settling. Once more beside Ethan's stroller, his chin resting protectively on the edge. "I think Scout approves of the arrangement," Michael said with a smile. Sarah blinked back tears as she reached for her father's hand. "It's perfect, Dad. Absolutely perfect." Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific, they walked together along the shoreline. Jack and Logan hung back slightly, watching as Michael pushed Ethan's stroller while Sarah walked beside them, her hand occasionally brushing against Michael's in a gesture of growing intimacy. Scout trotted ahead, pausing frequently to ensure his family stayed together. "You did good, Jack," Logan said quietly. "With all of it, the contingency planning, bringing Michael into the picture, keeping the family together." Jack nodded, his expression serene as he watched his extended family. "Learned something in all my years of rescue work," he replied. "Sometimes saving people isn't about the dramatic moment, carrying them from a burning building or pulling them from rubble. Sometimes it's about the quiet work that happens before and after, the preparation, the healing, the rebuilding. Is that why you trained Scout to recognize Ethan?" Logan asked, a question that had lingered since the earthquake. Jack's eyes crinkled with the wisdom of experience. "I've always believed dogs understand more than we give them credit for. Scout knew Sarah was family to me, which made Ethan family to him. I just reinforced the connection, made sure he understood. His responsibility extended to the next generation." They paused, watching as Scout suddenly darted ahead to investigate something in the surf, then returned to walk beside Ethan's stroller, maintaining his self-appointed duty even during a leisurely beach stroll. "You know," Logan said thoughtfully, "when I joined the department, I thought I was signing up to save strangers. I never expected to become part of a family in the process." Jack clasped Logan's shoulder with affection. "Family finds us in the strangest ways, son, through disaster and triumph, through promises made and kept." He gestured toward Scout, now trotting proudly beside Michael, Sarah, and Ethan. "That old dog taught me more about loyalty and love than most humans ever could. Seems fitting he'd be the one to bring us all together in the end." As the sun touched the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, Scout stopped and looked back, waiting for Jack and Logan to catch up. The German shepherd's intelligent eyes held a depth of understanding that transcended words, a living embodiment of the bonds that had formed through crisis and endured through recovery. "Come on, boy," Jack called softly. "Let's go home." Scout wagged his tail once, then turned to lead the way, guiding his assembled family toward the future that awaited them all, a future built on the foundation of one dog's unwavering devotion and the human hearts that had learned to follow his example. In the warm glow of sunset, they walked together along the shore, their footprints in the sand bearing silent witness to the incredible journey they had shared. And though none could predict what challenges tomorrow might bring, they faced the uncertainty with the quiet confidence of those who had discovered the most profound truth of all, that love, in its purest form, is the greatest rescue of all.